Andor has ended, to loud applause, critical acclaim, and universal praise. However, I found myself falling asleep during the first 3 episodes of season 1. Whilst I could appreciate the craft and delicacy of the show, I felt myself feeling emotionally and canonically disconnected from the show. So I gave up, and I vowed never to watch it again. However, 3 years on, with all the hype of season 2, I gave in and decided to give the show another chance. But did I manage to finish it? And if I did, was it any good? I'm going to break down season 1 and season 2 and then decide whether the show is boring, overrated content, or the best Star Wars ever made. Andor originated as a prequel to the series Rogue One, a Star Wars story, exploring the backstory of Cassian Andor, the rebel spy played by Diego Luna. Initially developed by Stephen Schiff, the project later shifted direction when Tony Gilroy, who co-wrote Rogue One and oversaw its celebrated reshoot, came on as a showrunner and head writer. Gilroy restructured the show into a more grounded, politically charged narrative, set 5 years before the events of Rogue One. Produced by Lucasfilm and filmed largely in the UK, Andor was envisioned as a 2-season arc, totaling 24 episodes designed to lead directly into the opening moments of Rogue One. Schiff's original direction for the show was more of a traditional Star Wars spy thriller. Schiff was the showrunner for the hit FX TV show The Americans, so this makes perfect sense. Gilroy, however, shifted the tone entirely, stripping away the fan service in favor of a grounded political drama about the roots of rebellion. His version focused on slow burn storytelling, moral complexity, and real-world parallels, transforming Andor into one of the most mature and radical pieces of Star Wars media. And episode 1 to 3 starts off in this tone, with our troubled protagonist Cassian Andor as he searches for his lost sister.
What happened?
And kind of accidentally, kills 2 corporate security officers. And this singular event shapes the story of the whole show, because Andor is then forced to flee the industrial planet Morlana 1 and go back to Ferrix, where we are introduced to some of the show's most important characters, Bix Kalleen and his adopted mother, Marva Andor, a quiet revolutionary. And already, the show frames Andor around 3 key female characters who shape his destiny: his lost sister, who we see in a flashback, Bix, and his adopted mother, Marva. Bix and Marva, especially, are key characters. Now, to be honest, what the first 2 episodes do really well is ground this show in reality. As much reality as you can from a show about spaceships and aliens. The Jedi, the lightsabers, the Force are literally an oversight, if a thought at all. The show keeps Star Wars, when it comes to the Jedi, as a quiet background force. And that was not a pun. Preferring to be gritty and tell stories about politics and human emotions. And for a person who loves Star Wars for the very things the show isn't talking about, this is a bold choice. In fact, some may say that this may seem like a bit of a slog. Episodes 1 and 2 especially are hard to get through. There's a lot of talking and a lot of world building. The flashbacks seem irrelevant, and for the most part they actually are and act more like filler than story development. It's not until we get to episode 3 that we finally meet a storyline and a character of true individual significance, with the introduction of Luthen Rael, played by the always magnificent Stellan Skarsgård. Now let's get something straight. Andor is a complex character. He's surrounded by revolution, from his childhood to his adopted mother to Bix. But ultimately he chooses to live quite nomadically, preferring to steal and make money. Luthen is a full-on revolutionary. There are hints that he was part of the Empire, or at least part of some form of military group. But his character now plays in the shadows with one sole purpose of bringing down the Empire. And episode 3 is when we get these 2 characters' paths collide. We have the revolutionary and the thief, one with a purpose and one without. And in Andor, Luthen sees anger and a wiliness that can help him achieve victory. And this is where the story truly begins. Now we can have fun. A clear pathway has been defined for our protagonist, and now the doors of enjoyment, it's still boring. Because the show then decides to slow down again. Yes, we have a standout episode like The Eye, where a heist is executed on Aldhani, which is a thrill ride of an episode, with some of the best integration of spaceship VFX ever done in Star Wars, and an ending which is wonderful, as our newly introduced character Skeen, played by Eben Moss Backrack, who plays Richie in The Bear, another Disney show, and will play the Thing in Fantastic Four, another Disney property. Gosh, Disney love this guy, don't they? But yeah, Skeen, who's part of a rebel group put together by Luthen, shows his true intentions and is immediately wiped out by Andor. All great stuff. However, the 2 episodes prior to this are not great fun. Too much build-up, too much talking, and one may be inclined to say a little boring. Now, do I share this view? Well, yes and no. Here's the thing, and this would be a common theme throughout this review. These moments are necessary. If you want to create great tension fuel set pieces, like the one on Aldhani, you need it. And in these scenes, we are also introduced to key characters like Vel Sartha and Cinta Kaz. So these are key moments. However, the way you handle these key moments is very important. Andor purposely opts for a quiet, grounded tone. There's a lack of humor, and all the dialogue, whilst cutting and brilliant, is very self-serious and full of pathos. Now, for episodes that last anywhere between 38 to 50 minutes, that's a lot of pathos. Not to mention, none of these characters ever crack a smile or take a second away from the plot to be just alive. And this can make the show feel very purposeful, yes, but can also get bogged down in its own sense of self-worth. So when another important character, Mon Mothma, is having deep, interwoven political chats with character A and character B, with that very same self-serious look in her face that appears in 99.9% of the show, you either disengage completely or you're truly invested. It's most likely one of the reasons why season 1 was so poorly reviewed, but conversely had such a loyal, strong fan base. It polarizes, and nothing best highlights this than the build-up to the heist in episode 3. So Andor betrays those of whom he did the heist with, and takes off to another planet to enjoy the beach. Now, it must be said at this point that the show can get quite confusing at times. Time jumps in season 1 are not normally flagged with title cards, and the use of wigs makes you think you might be watching a flashback, or maybe the characters have twins. It's very confusing. But anyway, he flees to the beach and is instantly arrested, and that's episode 7 done and dusted. Now, for me, episodes 8 to 12 feel like part 3 of this series. It's like episodes 1 to 3, episodes 4 to 6, and then episodes 8 to 12 are those 3 parts, with episode 7 acting as an intermission of sorts. Because episode 8 and 12 are actually some of the best writing, acting, and craft work put to TV ever. Andor is stuck in a high-security Imperial prison, a Narkina 5, sterile, brutal labor facility. There he meets fellow inmates, including Kino Loy, played by the always wonderful Andy Serkis, who supervises one of the factory's floors. Each inmate has been given a sentence to serve, and during their sentence, they are sent to labor and work on machines. Now, they don't know what machines they're working on, but every day they're made to work, counting down the minutes, hours, and days, as well as years, until they can be released. Now, as mentioned before, Andor is a thief, and despite being surrounded by people who are revolutionaries, he resists this life. And this point is slightly hammered over our heads a lot as viewers, with various characters making speeches about how revolution is essential and Andor refusing the call and so forth. Now, this is classic writing technique. The hero denies their calling until an event happens that triggers them into their inadvertent or direct calling. Now, these collections of episodes from 8 to 12 do this perfectly, with Kino refusing to rebel against the system, being a mouthpiece for the very system that is pressing him, telling inmates that they must work hard and serve their sentence so they'll be free. This, of course, is a lie that he himself is not even aware of. And slowly, as the plot begins to unravel, his faith is tested, his resolve is moved. And who is it moved by? Our protagonist, Andor. He doesn't want to rebel, but in his desire to be free of the prison, he starts a rebellion, a mini rebellion against the Empire. This is a reversal which is so brilliant. In these 4 episodes, the writers and showrunners managed to say everything they need to say about rebellion, fascism, and the personal cost of resistance. But not only that, they managed to nail the craft of writing the perfect protagonist arc in just 4 episode, 5 if you include episode 7. From Kino being the voice of the antagonists to being the voice of the protagonist by the end of the episode run. To this glorious moment when all the inmates have to jump to their freedom to the sea below, and he proclaims that he actually can't swim. We are left never knowing what happened to Kino Rory. This 4-episode arc is the sheer perfection. But
What now?
I'm not gonna let this season get off so lightly, because yes, every now and again, the season strays into literal perfection, and with a writer like Tony Gilroy at the helm, that's not surprising. He's the greatness behind the original Bourne trilogy, and his brother Dan Gilroy, who also worked on this show, is the genius mind behind Nightcrawler. But much of the time, the series is weighed down by confusing time jumps, distracting wigs, a self-serious tone, and a noticeable lack of humor. It repeatedly insists upon telling us that Andor is destined to be a rebel, which is not only information we already know, but also information we've been told 3 times already, and we kind of get to this point which starts to get very grating. And speaking of grating, it's time to talk about Mon Mothma.
Because as long as everyone thinks I'm an irritation, there's a good chance they'll miss what I'm really doing.
Okay, so if you're not a fan of opinions and nuanced discussion, avert your ears for a few minutes, because yes, I'm about to go there. Mon Mothma is a terrible character. Now let's not get terrible character confused with terrible actress, because Genevieve O'Reilly is brilliant in the role. She saves this rather two-dimensional character from complete ruin. But ultimately, what they try to portray Mon as just doesn't work. They want her to be a conflicted mother who wants good for all around her, but is also conflicted because she has an idealistic vision of what democracy is and what her daughter is, and blah, 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 blah. And this is a problem. There's far too much going on with this character. What they want her to be is a complex female character who's crushed by the weight of her choices. What they achieve is a character who feels like they're stuck on the island of a roundabout, and instead of picking a direction and following it and getting off the roundabout, she simply spins around in a circle, achieving nothing apart from dizziness. The difference between her and Luthen is stark. And I'm not talking about their actions, I'm talking about their characterization. Luthen has a clear vision and will stop at nothing and no one to achieve it, no matter who it is. His decisions are polarizing, violent, and deceptive. And whilst he will battle with various characters about his motives, he remains clear, even if he betrays his instincts. While Mothma is given too much to juggle as a character, and what they want to mold from this mess of characterization is simply too much to handle, especially as the show is full of so many characters who are all juggling similar, multiple storylines and purposes. In this video alone, I've already named about 10 characters who are all doing the exact same thing. Mom needed to be the lead character or have her own show in order to show her complexities realized properly. And in season 1, we merely get brief clips how she manages her life problems, and it's just not enough to sustain our interest or bring nuance to them. In fact, a female character, which we touched upon slightly already, but is handled way better, is Andor's mother, who gets 1/8 of the screen time, but I care more about her decisions, her plight, and her complexities than I do about Mon Mothma. However, having said that, in season 2, Mon gets way more screen time, and do they handle her better there? Well, let's find out. So season 1 was a resounding success. Everyone loved it. Disney was saved. Star Wars was saved. Well, no, neither of those things happened. Maybe the closest being that it was loved by majority, but the problem was the show wasn't being watched by the majority. In fact, only by a small minority. And therefore, season 2 of Andor wasn't always guaranteed. Despite the critical acclaim for the grounded tone, the political depth, and the mature storytelling, the show reportedly underperformed in viewership compared to that of other Star Wars series like The Mandalorian or Obi-Wan Kenobi. With high production costs, a long shoot schedule, and a serious tone that was harder to market, Disney and Lucasfilms internally debated whether to continue the series. Creator Tony Gilroy had always envisioned Andor as a 2-season arc leading directly to Rogue One, And despite the delays caused by the 2023 writers and actors strikes, during which Gilroy paused his involvement amid controversy, Lucasfilm immediately reaffirmed his commitment. Gilroy confirmed that season 2 would be the final season, structured around 4 time-jumping arcs that chart Cassian's evolution into the rebel hero seen in Rogue One. Season 2 wrapped filming in early 2024, fulfilling the story's intended conclusion, and therefore we got it, season 2. Now, at the end of season 1, there was an epic episode when Marva, Andor's mother, has a funeral, and there's a massive shootout with the Empire on Ferrix, which means that Bix and other characters have to leave and go undercover. Amidst the good guys having their journeys in season 1, we're introduced to Deja Miro and Cyril Khan, who are 2 antagonists on separate paths towards their goals with the Empire. However, when they meet each other and become lovers, firstly, it's kind of weird. I mean, this combo on screen just gives me shivers, but also it's a dangerous combination. And in this season, they are even more prominent. Episodes 1 to 3 of the season are a bit like season 1, slow build up to come to this set piece, which again has great integration of spaceship VFX, but also leads to the most controversial scene in recent Star Wars history, maybe in Star Wars history ever, maybe in the whole of Star Wars, the attempted assault on Bix. Bix, who's played by rising star Andrea Arjona, defended the scene, emphasizing the importance of portraying real-world issues within the Star Wars narrative. She stated that the scene was meant to reflect the brutal realities of war and the abuse of power, and that it was essential to tell the story authentically and respectfully. Arjona worked closely with showrunner Tony Gilroy and director Ariel Kelman to ensure the scene was handled with care, and she drew upon real-life accounts of survivors to inform her of her performance. She also highlighted the significance of Bix's response, noting that the character's ability to fight back and survive was a powerful statement of resilience. However, some Star Wars fans thought the scene was wholly inappropriate, especially the biggest Star Wars YouTuber, Star Wars Theory.
I didn't feel like that really belonged in Star Wars. It was just off-putting. I feel like what George did was that he had implied scenes. So like Anakin with the kids, with the lightsabers, and then it cuts. You know what's going to happen. And there was actually supposed to be a scene where you show all of the kids chopped up on the floor, but they decided against it. And I've covered that as well in videos. There's implied scenes, and there's you're going too far with Star Wars. Leia with Jabba. You don't see him taking her from the back or his passing her around or anything like that. Maybe it's in the books it's explained, or the comics is totally different. But with this being shown, I mean, to me, I found it jarring. I didn't like it. And the argument a lot of people are making is that it's a real show. It's for adults. And I'm like, do you need to see that for it to be a real show? You need to see that for it to be an adult show. Listen, we all have experiences with, unfortunately, I'm just gonna say it was sexual assault. And whether it's someone we know very close to us or people we've known or ourselves, unfortunately, we know it's fucking real. I don't want to see it in my Star Wars.
Of which he received much backlash from. Now, where you sit with the scene being in the show really depends on your sensibilities, and is definitely a wider debate for another video. But as a fact, the actual scene doesn't show anything graphic. What it does do, though, is correct quite an important arc for Bix, which will see payoff later in the series. However, we cannot move past episode 3 without exploring this. Now, I'm not sure if the showrunner, the director, the writers, the editors, and so on put this scene in the show as a self-aware piss take or not, but wow, what the heck is this? As soon as I heard EDM music at this wedding scene, by the way, just as a side note, Mon Mothma's daughter gets married in a marriage arranged by Mon because, it doesn't really matter, it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter, just move on. It just doesn't matter, let's move on. Just more proof of the layers they're trying to install upon this character. But anyway, as soon as I heard EDM music at this wedding in a Star Wars show, I instantly thought, that doesn't sound like Star Wars. And when I saw this dance, I was like, yeah, these guys are just taking the piss. There's no way in the world that they didn't think that this scene would become a meme. They made this a meme on purpose. They must have done. It's quite frankly ridiculously stupid and pure genius at the same time. I mean, it's just, look at this. It's just so dumb. Anyway, what episode 1 to 3 does is fall into the loop of the setup with slow, self-serious dialogue to have a magnificent payoff. And does this mean that episode 4 to 6 will do the same thing?
You bet your fucking ass it will!
Because in episodes 4 to 6, we prepare for another heist. Yes, another one. Exciting. George, Brad, Matt, Julia, Don, all the team together. Another heist. Well, no. This heist is a bit like the last one. It's slow, talky. But on the plus side, it's the first time we get to see Andor pretend to be another character with a full costume and a different name. That's really fun. It's a bit like playing the game Hitman.
Hey, you
47. The race is over. Sierra will be coming.
Now, this is around about when the show focuses on a really important group of characters called the Gormen, or the Gorman. It's like it doesn't matter. But, it's on the planet called Gorman. These episodes are ripped straight out of the film Battle of the Algiers. If you've not seen that film, give it a watch. And by the way, this is not a bad thing. Battle of the Algiers is one of the best films ever made. The atmosphere, the plotting, characters even speak with a French dialect that is not French but sounds French. Weird? Well, maybe. Anyway, yet again, Andor again refuses to assist on the heist because, it's for political reasons, yet again evading the call to be a hero. And at this point, I was kind of done with Andor's journey. Again, I get that they are building him up to show that he was a reluctant hero, but having him actively vocalizing his reluctance to do so many times is so tiresome. In fact, I found these series of episodes rather mundane, and the heist itself is rather low-key. Now, some other stuff happens with this weird couple, this guy's weird mother. Listen, I have to say, I'm really disrespecting this couple a bit. Deirdre and Cyril are actually huge characters in the plot, and moreover, they are magnificent characters, especially Cyril. He's a very layered bad guy who is on the path of self-destruction, but in a quiet and noble way. As Tony Gilroy described it, he's one of the originators of this fascist regime, who, like what happens in all movements like this, gets crushed under the weight of what it eventually becomes. He's merely just a pawn, and his weird relationship with his mother and Deirdre is handled brilliantly. So, putting the heist to one side, Bix goes through PTSD over her attempted assault and her torturing she received in season 1, and here's where we see her get revenge in a really cathartic scene, which is very cool and very desperado. And from here does the show continue its 3-episode arc trend? Well, no, it doesn't. And episodes 7 and 8 are rather non-events. Now, I have to interject here for a moment to say at this point in the show, halfway through season 2, I was struggling to continue it. I had this recurring thought in my head. I have to be completely honest. I was thinking about not doing this video and actually just stopping watching the series. It was a real struggle to turn on Disney Plus and put another episode on. I was uninspired by the show. I had this reoccurring thought in my head. That thought was, this show is wildly inconsistent. At times, it's some of the best TV ever, much less the best Star Wars. At times, it's very boring. And also, it feels nothing like Star Wars at all. If someone rebranded the show and called it something else like Mr. Poopy Space Adventures, it would be just as good and just as inconsistent. And because the creator of the show opted to make it so gritty and so grounded in reality, it's a far cry from the triumphant John Williams scores of the original trilogy, the campness of the prequels, and the stupidity of the Disney trilogy. And also, which I'll dive into very shortly, it's actually very different from Rogue One, the Disney movie of which this show was born from. So I have to say, I was rather unconvinced by this show and a little confused, and I stopped watching it. However, I got bored one day and I put on episode 9, and episodes 9 to 12 change everything. So as I mentioned, the Gorman planet is basically Battle of the Algiers in space, and this highly rebellious planet is known for its fashion and glam lifestyle. and is also the catalyst for the show's last episodes. And this is because of the massacre of the Gormans. The Empire, who infiltrated Gorman's plot of rebellion by Cyril and Deirdre, decide to finally show their force. And this is where the weird couple have a mini Ross and Rachel breakup moment.
We are so over.
Fine by me!
However, the consequences are huge, as we lose Cyril in this massacre, as well as other key characters who have been built up over the season. To be honest, I didn't really care about these characters and didn't find them particularly compelling. Let death and were full of grandiose speeches and whispers. But what we do get from this all-out massacre is the Empire finally coming out of the shadows and showing their true colors. Now the galaxy knows the Empire is not just bad, but really, really bad. How they didn't know that before is kind of shocking. I mean, look at their outfits. It just screams bad guys.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't,
Hans, are we the baddies?
Andor, who was there for the massacre, because of course he's there for the massacre, the plot says he needs to be there, so he's there, leaves the scene in tears, and finally, he's ready to rebel, kind of, maybe. But what we do get from this massacre is two great things. First being Andor finds K2SO, who you may remember from Rogue One if you've seen the film, and is maybe my favourite character in that film along with Donnie Yang Sirat, but he's 100% my favourite droid in all of Star Wars media ever. And secondly, we get Mon's big speech in front of the Senate, and maybe her best moments in the show happen from this point onwards, because she's no longer burdened with the terrible plot points and the deadweight characters she was carrying, like her daughter and husband. Now, I do hate those characters. Now she has real purpose, and we get to see it, culminating in an amazing sequence where Andor saves her life by taking her out of the Senate, and it's just great. Listen, episodes 9 to 12 of season 2 surpass season 1's final episodes in scope, writing, acting, backstory, filmmaking, literally everything. And that's saying something, because I was waxing lyrical about season 1's ending in this video. But season 9 to 12 are just TV perfection. We have Luthen's story come to an end, who I barely mentioned in this video, but he's just a brilliant character. He's finally found by Deirdre. We have his self-sacrifice, so they can't interrogate him for information, and when Deirdre tries to keep him alive, another character I've not even mentioned yet, Kayla, who's been working alongside him since he rescued her as a child, as we see in a great series of flashbacks, decides she has to finish the job and take his life as per what he would have wanted. It is brilliant and poignant and such great writing. This episode won me over to Kayla as a character, as before I barely knew a thing about her. Deirdre is then arrested by her own people and left to rot in jail, which is a fitting ending to a character who's manipulated her way to the top. And then we finally see Mon take her place as part of the real rebellion. Before we are greeted to Andor learning of Luthen's passing, saving Kayla in a really great rescue mission, accompanied by my fave droid, K2SO, and then the show ties itself into a really nice tidy bow so that it can lead nicely into Rogue One. Listen, I've missed out so much. For example, how Bix leaves Andor so he has no reason to escape his fate and has to join the rebellion, Cinta's death, Wilson Krennic, who appears in this show to imprison Dedra, but is also the main antagonist in Rogue One, Deirdre ending up in the same prison that Andor was in season 1, and so much more. But ultimately, these last 4 episodes have won me over. This show is actually great, or rather, has greatness running through it. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have episodes of sheer boredom and a protagonist that should have found his path easier than he did. But honestly, not many shows ever have had so many characters, protagonists and antagonists, that are so rich in scope and have their stories perfectly tied up. I would say that only Breaking Bad has managed this level of scope. Now, it's not saying that the show is anywhere near the level of Breaking Bad. It doesn't have a compelling enough main protagonist who we hate and love in equal measure. Sopranos did, Breaking Bad did. Maybe, if anything, The Wire is the closest comparison, but again, it's nowhere near as good as that either. However, the show does have its own charm, and for that I am completely won over. But here's the problem. The show feels too thematically and stylistically disconnected from Star Wars, not just the original trilogy, but any Star Wars media ever produced. I couldn't imagine any of these characters appearing in something like Phantom Menace, or even a more recent series like Ahsoka. It's just so distinct. almost feels like it belongs to an entirely different universe. To test whether this reaction was fair, I watched Rogue One immediately after finishing this series to see whether there was a real connection or if Andor genuinely enhanced the experience of that film. And it actually made Rogue One worse. And Rogue One was my favorite Star Wars film since the original trilogy. It still is, but I don't like it as much as after watching the show. You see, Rogue One is a weird film. I would ask you to rewatch it now after watching Andor. Rogue One is trying so hard to connect to the original Star Wars films. The music is so different from Andor. The tone, the themes, the characters are cartoony, with one-liners like
I've got a bad feeling about
Quiet.
what?
being used. The cameos from 3CPO and R2-D2. Even Andor himself is just so different. He lacks edge. Edge that I thought existed when seeing Rogue One for the first time. Watching him now, he's a very soft version of the TV show version. Characters we see in Andor are not mentioned in Rogue One or just omitted. Andor's backstory is changed as he proclaims constantly, "I was born into the rebellion and I've been fighting rebellion since I was a kid." Have you, bro? Because you actually spent 24 episodes denying the rebellion every chance you got. Believe me, I heard every single time. And some of the CG at times in Rogue One is fantastic, much like the TV show. But this and this, oh God, make it stop. Oh, who looking at this now, who actually thought they could get away with this? It's absolutely abysmal. It's a real toss-up between this guy's face and characteristics and this guy's mustache. Like, which one's worst? Which one?
Both.
So here's my closing thoughts. Andor is a great piece of TV, but not Star Wars at all. In fact, this reminds me of another intergalactic TV show that became movies, Star Trek. In 2009, J.J. Abrams introduced the Kelvin timeline, which left the original movies and shows on the Prime timeline. Very confusing and rather pointless. Now, I'm not a Trekkie. I have nothing against it, but I just never got into it. I love the first J.J. Abrams movie, but I know it has its detractors. Andor feels like it's now split Star Wars into two. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing comes down to your personal individual taste. I know for one, I love the original trilogy. I do not like the sequels, and I hate the Disney movies. Although I do still like The Force Awakens, don't kill me. So maybe this departure onto an Andor timeline might actually be a good thing. One thing I do know for a fact is that Disney now have a major problem on their hands. They didn't expect this show to be this good. Now, do they shift direction and keep up with the tonality and themes of Andor, or do they keep trying to resurrect Rey Skywalker from her very deep grave? All I know is got those Disney execs thinking,
I have a very bad feeling about this.
listen, this has definitely been my longest ever video. It took me ages to make, and this is in no small part to these amazing YouTube members and Patreon members on screen. Big love to you all. Honestly, this channel has been going for just over a year now, coming on to 2 years, in fact. And from day one, some of you members, some of you people who comment all the time, some of you people who are just so positive, and even those people who challenge me and actually have good back and forth, you guys are absolutely tremendous. Those of you who are occasionally rude, I love you too. It's all good. It's all love. And this is the great thing about film and movie and TV. It makes you feel passionate. It makes you feel like you have an opinion. It makes you feel like it's your own film, your own movie. And really, I couldn't be sharing my thoughts with a more amazing bunch of individuals. Listen, if you'd like your name at the end of my videos, then click on the link in the descriptions and join my Patreon or become a member. There are many benefits, like you get videos like this nice and early. You help videos like this, you get your name in the credits. Also, you get stuff that's not uncensored on my channel as well, because YouTube loves to censor things. So yeah, please become a member or a patron. And if you could like the video on your way out, that would be greatly appreciated. Big love, and I'll speak to you soon.